Hi guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. My phone said it had a 6% battery charge, and then it was freezing and pausing up, and I think I lost my whole first take. So even if I didn't lose my first take, scrap that. Let's do this again, because we got to do two things in this review. We got to talk about the DIY printing aspect of it and how viable that is for the creators. And some other people just talked about the printing aspect. I actually want to talk about the art and story. Cuddles is going to meow the whole time. Hold on. Sorry, George. I got to let him in. Get in here, Cuddles. Get in here, you loud-mouthed cat. Here. All right. You happy, Cuddles? There, I'm patting you. Don't you stand on my comic books, though, because I like these comics. With that segue, let's talk about how nicely these comics are printed. All right, so when George started talking about how he had purchased a printer and planned to print these at home, a Twitter war erupted at some point, and I, on purpose, noped out because I could tell that like the CG Civil War was going to come in, all the old sides were going to come in and bash each other. So on purpose, I checked out of that. So because I checked out of that, I can't talk about it. I don't have an informed opinion about it. But the reason I bring it up is this is kind of semi a response to the Sweetcast's review where he talks about the print quality of these books. I know he was involved in that back and forth to some capacity. I don't care what one of the problems is like something which could actually be a really interesting conversation, like how viable is DIY printing? Is this a good plan for independent creators to pursue? Like everyone should be rooting for George and saying, I want to know if it's a good idea for me to print at home. Let's find out, right? And so that, but then when like the personal, politics stuff comes into it, it's sort of like that blows up the whole thing and everything becomes about personalities yelling at each other. And we stop talking about what's actually kind of like the interesting thing, which is, can I do this at home? Would this work for me? All right, so in Clint's review, he talks about some of his like small gripes with the print quality of it, and he basically concludes that this could work for a niche audience, but he doesn't think that this is a functional replacement to more like traditional methods of printing comic books. So I want to kind of announce it first off that I have never done anything professionally in printing comic books at all. I have no idea what goes into it. The only thing I've done is some DIY comic publishing stuff, and I've done some of like the computer work in layout and design for newspapers. So I don't know that much about details of printing. I just know what looks good on a screen, basically. And I do have quite a bit of experience in that realm. So what I will say is I agree with Clint that I can tell this was made by hand. For example, if you just put these two together, you can see a slight difference in the height of the two books. There might be a little thing like the edge of the cover isn't 100% flush with the interior pages. I don't think I would have noticed that if Clint hadn't pointed it out in his review. What I will say is, as a persnickety guy who really cares about color and art, the paper quality and the print quality and of the ink is phenomenal. And I do think this would be a viable option if you are maybe to hire George yourself, or to adopt George's method for yourself if you would like to print your own high quality comic books, distribute them yourself, and you just for some reason you don't want to go through like the process of submitting to one of the traditional things. Maybe you don't even like I don't know, like Image Comics. You don't like what their brand represents. You don't like Derek Larson being weird on Twitter, so you just want to make them yourself and do it yourself. Yeah, I think that what George has demonstrated is that it's very viable for a do-it-yourself artist to produce a high-quality book that looks really, really good. And yeah, you could quibble like, it doesn't 100% line up. I don't care do you really care if it's maybe if you like are a hyper crazy collector and you're like insane about like the comic book grading quality, is it graded 10.0? Is it graded 9? That stuff would probably be important to you. But so for me, let me actually talk about why I like DIY comics, because I do think that is a niche thing. But the reason to me DIY comics are kind of special is the artist is involved in actually putting it together for me. So like there are DIY avenues where you can like go to a festival and people have DIY comics. Like the Portland comics culture is really centered around the DIY movement. It is very SJW. You're gonna be, everyone's gonna be like a crazy socialist. But to me, like introducing yourself into that culture is actually a great way to introduce your art to people. And I'm always advocating artists should look for every avenue they can to introduce their work to people. So I like DIY. Another thing is, if someone is going to be like the next Todd McFarlane, like to me, it's really cool to have like if I could go back in time and get a dinky little sketch that Todd McFarlane made at a convention before he was famous, like that would be so cool, right? So when people talk about like the niche of DIY, DIY doesn't have to be crappy. These are very good looking books. So if you're considering that, my conclusion is I think this is a viable option for that any independent creator should consider. Talk to George about it. Maybe hire George. Maybe do it yourself. For me personally, I'm going to emphasize cost when I choose a printer. Like I want, if it's a floppy book, I'm going to emphasize lowest cost possible to move the most books. And if I'm not doing a floppy book, if I'm doing like a Doug TenNapel style beautiful hardcover, I'm going to want like maximum quality, maximum expense, right? So I'll be considering whether I'll use George's method or not. I'm strongly considering using a DIY method myself for Jane Smith Wannabe Gladiator, but those are decisions to come down the road. So enough about printing. Let's talk about the story, because I really enjoy the story and art. So the basic concept is, what if a cute girl in a like anime robot pilot, combat robot, had sort of the qualities of a Mary Sue, but these were presented as negative qualities. So she's not literally a Mary Sue. She's a character with flaws inspired by the Mary Sue archetype. And I think that George had to walk a real tightrope here, where you could fall in either direction. Like you could then make her flawed and have her not be a Mary Sue anymore and kind of miss the point, or you could make her too Mary Sue-ish and she just becomes annoying to the audience. And I think he found a really nice line where she actually is a character. She is a comment on the Mary Sue character archetype, but she doesn't. She still is that archetype, and she doesn't annoy me. Her annoying aspects I read them as flaws. I don't get annoyed by them myself. Looking at volume 1, okay, I love this stuff. This stuff and all the stats and things were really helpful to me, and even like a little character development here in Rosemary's notes on the robot. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about George's art style. So when the crazy Twitter kerfuffle was happening, eventually then people started dunking on George's art style and calling it the Tumblr art style. I've read a lot of George's work. He started in a webcomic, which was clearly very strongly influenced by Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and gradually he started developing a new style that is less cute than that style, but I think it's more dynamic, and it gives him, more options to like do 3D fight scenes and things like that. So I do sense like the Tumblr style and things like the noses, and he even colors her nose red sometimes. Like I personally don't like the red nose because I read a red nose as the character is drunk. But what I think George does an amazing job of is he has a lot of fluidity, dynamism, action in his work, and I think he balances like the Tumblr influences in his style with other things. And the thing is, I've never hated the Tumblr art style. I've always thought that you just need to mix in different influences and make it work for what you're doing. And actually, it also even kind of works for the story where we have a Mary Sue character and a slight influence of the Tumblr art style mixed in with the Mary Sue character. I think the best way to illustrate my point would be maybe to contrast what George is doing with what Erica Henderson did. So when I read Erica Henderson's work, like I didn't resonate with the art style. I felt like it was really awkward, but I've always loved cartoony and fun and silly art styles. So I always felt like Erica Henderson had a cute, fun, silly way of drawing. And then when she went to work at Marvel, she tried to ape the Marvel style, and the result was lack of harmony. It didn't feel like good superhero art. It didn't feel like fun, expressive, cartoony art. It stayed in kind of this uncanny valley. So George also does have these kind of like Tumblr influences in his style, but I feel like he takes that and then he mixes in some like crazy over the top action scenes, and he'll sometimes like have a silly scene where the expression is really, really silly and really goofy looking, but that's part of the humor of it. So that is what I think he does best, is he lets his style be a little goofy and crazy when it needs to be goofy and crazy for the funny stuff. He kind of tightens things up and adds a lot more, woomph to it when the action scenes are coming in. And I've always said I really like artists who are doing something different. Hirohiko Araki, the artist for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, he has some awkward figure drawings sometimes too, but it's so unique and so expressive that you get absorbed in it. And I would give this like a high recommendation based on how exciting the action sequences were and how dynamic they feel. So since I'm OCD, I always talk about my gripes. So now I'm going to talk about some of my gripes. I felt like there were a couple spots. I want to find the actual panel, come to think of it. There are a couple spots where the speech balloons are not pointing directly at the person speaking. So Marie is saying, whoa, and then the hot guy here is saying this line here. And you can kind of tell, well, is it going to her or is it going to him? So I was able to figure out through context that Marie says this and then he says that, because usually someone else speaks in the second balloon, right? My trick would always be, my eye ought to be able to follow it like a sight line directly to the mouth or head of the person speaking. So maybe that would mean like putting it here and over her head, so it's clearly not her talking, or making it a little longer so there's like a bit more of a, go down this way and go up this way, whoop, and then, okay, point towards him, right? So it didn't stop me from understanding what was going on. I would just say like, double check. Yeah, just literally use that trick. Use the trick of saying, can I follow the point of the arrow from the speech balloon to the guy speaking? Maybe one more quibble is the first issue focuses on developing Marie's character, which is my favorite thing about it. I think he did a really good job of finding that balance. And then right at the end, the robot suit shows up. So, kind of a setup issue, and then issue 2 is really exciting and all focused on the robot fight. I wish that there had been like a hint of the robot suit before it shows up. And the term for this is Chekhov's gun, after the playwright. So Chekhov's gun means if you show the audience a gun early on in the story, they're expecting to see the gun get shot later in the story, basically. It's the reason why every time a character coughs in a movie, they're going to be sick or they're probably going to die. It's because if you want to show... There's no reason to waste time showing a character coughing or show the gun if you're not going to use it later. So I wish there had been like a scene early on where it's explained to us she's a contractor, she uses this robot suit. It's irresponsible to run off and use this robot suit without, contacting the insurance company first, right? Like something kind of dumb, even dumb, like a character saying, man, it'd sure be irresponsible for someone to run off with a robot suit without contacting the insurance company, am I right? And the robot suit shows up at the end and we realize she's being irresponsible, right? There was also like a really, my favorite part of this was her kind of like sexy interaction with the guy she liked, where this is where George found the balance, where she's kind of annoying and she kind of projects, like, oh, get off me, you awful cat, right? So she sort of like apes SJW talking points. But it's clear that she is clearly into this guy, and her sort of like little feminist, brusqueness is just a way of like her not coping with the fact that she has these really strong feelings for him and almost flirting with him a little bit. So what's great about that is she is kind of that annoying, Valley Girl personality. But underneath that is also kind of like this fun, sexy girl who just likes a guy and is interested in him. Now, for me, like, it could have been tightened up. I like this too, where she has this conversation about space, and she talks about how it's like a timeless light show made just for me. She's kind of a nihilist, or she kind of has like a materialist attitude of the universe, that the universe is going to be here forever and we're all going to die, right? And so when she describes it as all being made just for me, that's a great way of subtly underscoring her selfishness as a character. She's a character whose flaw is her selfishness. But then kind of like there's this little romantic, double entendre conversation that goes on for about like 3 or 4 pages. And I felt like if that was 2 pages, then we could have gotten like the robot scene earlier on. So I really enjoyed the romantic back and forth between her and this guy. I would have just tightened that up a little bit to introduce a few different like robot plot points. All right, so that was my quibble with that. Beautiful, gorgeous Sashi art. I've just got to show that off on the back of this. And issue 2 is where all of the butt kicking starts happening. There's comedy where like the bad guy she's fighting kind of has this cute little human element to him. George is throughout the action scenes is using like all of these expressive energy lines to, you know, like show energy spiking off her. I even like the thing that, you know, battery power is a big problem for them. So she's got to have like this AI battery strapped to her all this time to power the suit as she's fighting. It's kind of like a good average suit that's, you know, like jack of all trades suits, but it's not, you know, particularly good at any one thing, and it's irresponsible to be like overclocking and using too much power, and she's always doing that. So it's a really great dynamic fight scene, and then kind of like a serious, like responsible moment for her at the end where she thinks about what she did wrong, right? So the point is she has these annoying Mary Sue aspect to her personality, but at the end of the day, she can get the job done, and she is like reflective on some of her mistakes. So I think it's just a great balance for her character and a setup at the end of what'll happen. And here's more of George's underdrawing. I think that George is very much a artist who's aware of the importance of the underdrawing and of preserving the warmth of the underdrawing, and so he adds the most polish to like the most serious scenes, and he lets a little bit more of the silly, you know, goofy, quick doodle aspect come across in the silly and comedic scenes. So I'm very happy with my purchase. I am eager to see what happens next. I always have a few quibbles here and there, but none of it damaged my enjoyment of the story overall. So do consider DIY as an option for you. If you don't think you can make it work, consider a traditional route. But I'm grateful that George gave this a shot, and I am absolutely happy with how good the paper feels and how good the ink looks, and of course the art itself. It's a good vehicle for presenting his art to the world. So that's it. #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Say no to Twitter drama. Catch you later.